Progressive overload. Oh, progressive overload. Some concepts you can choose to ignore in your fitness journey, which will ultimately end up with you having a ripped ass body. But let me tell you, progressive overload sure isn't one of those. Now, let's talk progressive overload. This process, such as anabolism and catabolism, isn't really as much as a linear process as it is more of a process that closely resembles a toddler's masterpiece. Something to keep in mind while discussing these fitness concepts is taking a balanced analytical middle ground. Don't look for the X and the extremes of the spectrum, and look at things in context and use a common sense approach to understanding the information that is directed at you. It is something that is getting deeply ingrained in me, that we need to hold ourselves more accountable for the information and the concepts we are projecting to you guys. But first, since we are talking overload, let's first define it. And to do this, I'm going to firstly provide the textbook definition, which is as follows. Beneficial adaptations occur in response to demands applied to the body at levels beyond a certain threshold, but within the limits of tolerance and safety. Basically, progressive overload is creating a challenge or a stress to the muscle, creating a challenging or stressful stimulus in order to force the muscle to adapt to said stimulus. Now, one thing for sure isn't true. Most people, when they hear progressive overload, they immediately think about adding more weights to their workouts or to their movements. But this is just not true, you know. For sure, adding weight is one form of progressive overload. But it isn't the one way, the only way. Some of you might be asking,
do you know the way?
Trust me, I know the way. Why is it important? Well, it is important for different reasons depending on where in the spectrum you are. Are you a beginner? Are you intermediate or advanced lifter? Are you on juicy vitamin, field capricin, or are you a natural bodybuilder? And the whole other horde of factors that you need to take into consideration when talking about this subject. Well, basically, the more beginner level you are, the more adding weight makes sense as a reliable source of generating this progressive overload. Of course, you need to first learn the technique of said lifts in order to then start adding the weight in order to get that progressive overload. But before you start adding the weight, you need to get the technique down. But even that said, it is just easier for a beginner when they get the technique down to get that weight in the movement to create this progressive overload over time. Where someone who is just more of an intermediate or advanced, they can't just add weight indefinitely. Otherwise, we would see plenty of hulks outside of the Marvel universe just bench pressing trucks for the pump, which would be awesome, but doesn't happen. The truth is, the more of an intermediate or advanced lifter you are, the closer you are to your genetic potential of muscle size and strength, and like in any activity, there comes a point of diminishing returns. And so the more advanced lifter is, the more creative he needs to be in order to induce this progressive overload. For example, texting your girlfriend, saying that she looks fat on the dress that she bought last week, is bound to progressively overload your life, or even exponentially. No, okay. On a more serious note, let's now continue our discussion in the different ways to progressively overload. Well, if loading up the weight isn't viable in the long run, what are the alternatives, you might ask? Well, I will list a few. decreasing the rest intervals, making your muscle more fatigued for the next set, upping the difficulty a notch. You can change the tempo of your lifts. You can really control and slow down the eccentric and accelerate on the concentric. You can increase the range of motion of the lift, which is a sure way to really up that tension. You can increase your volume, increase the number of reps on a given set or the number of sets overall during your training session. You can increase the frequency of your training, hitting muscles more often during the week. You can watch the notebook before going to the gym. Trust me, that shit makes you weak.
I wrote you every day for a year.
You trophy?
Yes. It wasn't over. Still isn't over.
As a beginner, you can just stay simple and go for learning the techniques and increasing the weights on the major compound lifts, as well as supplementing with some isolation lifts for sure. As you get closer to intermediate and advanced, you need to be a little bit more creative, and you don't need to just choose a form of progressive overload. You can really mix and match according to whatever works for you. It is really something that you need to understand, that training plans are highly individualized, are highly personal to you, to an individual, and you got to figure over time what works best for you. Even though most beginners have the same start line and similar workouts, doesn't necessarily mean that the more advanced you get, it remains the same. No, on the contrary. But why can't you just keep adding weights indefinitely? Well, basically because progressive overload isn't really linear, you know? And it would be awesome if you could, but it would lead to some really interesting situations. But Brett Contreras says it best when he says, no gains from weight training, be it mobility, hypertrophy, strength, power, endurance, or fat loss, will ever occur in a linear nature. The body doesn't work that way. Adaptations happen in waves. Sometimes you'll make big jumps in a single week in a particular quality, while other times you will stall for 3 months in another quality. But over the long haul, everything goes up. But it's a windy road. There are physiological reasons for this phenomenon, which is beyond the scope of this article. Well, you guys, this is a world-renowned researcher in the industry saying that progressive overload isn't linear, and indeed occurs in waves. If you have watched the previous episode in anabolic metabolism, you will know what I'm talking about, this concept of waves and how it functions. Like I said, also this is the concept I talked about previously. And I want you guys to also remember about the battle that happens between those two essential metabolic processes in your body. This is something to always have in mind. The road isn't going to be smooth. You won't be doing better and better than yesterday every day. You won't be eating PRs every workout. Well, you won't even tie with your previous workout sometimes. You just need to know that it's not you doing anything wrong. And this is indeed normal. So don't get discouraged at times like this, and trust the process. You got to trust the process. You got to trust the process like you know that next time you'll go through McDonald's drive-thru and you will order something, you know that they will not leave you any ketchup in that bag. You just got to have that level of trust, you know. But now, let's pretend that this would be possible, the so-called linear progressive overload. Brett Contreras says it best when he says, however, let's pretend for a minute that you could make linear progress for an entire year on a particular lift. A 10-pound jump per week would equate to 520 pounds in a year. Even a 5 jump pound per week would equate to 260 pounds a year. One rep jump per week would equate to 52 reps in a year, while a 1 rep per month would equate to 12 reps in a year. You won't gain any of those. You won't gain 260 to 500 pounds in any lift, or even 52 to 12 reps in any other exercise. On most lifts, actually. It just isn't going to happen. Some sessions you will be surprisingly strong and make big gains. Some sessions you'll simply tie with your previous efforts. In some sessions you'll be weaker and go backwards. But every 6 months you'll likely be stronger and fitter. Well, honestly, if somewhere in my life I get to choose between true love and an increase in 520 pounds in a major compound lift, I'm going to wipe my tears off a broken heart in a certificate of a deadlift world record. Yeah, for sure. No second thought about that one. Okay, now continuing. Of course, you need to focus on improving the quality of every individual session as much as you can. But focusing on a bigger time spectrum of a year will give you a better overall I would say, frame for you to really put your improvement against. You know, it will give you another perspective in which you might, if you take the time spectrum of 1 day or 1 week, you would have gotten worse, but over the period of 6 months, you would have gotten better. You might be thinking now, well then, what happens if I am meeting those plateaus? These waves, like Contreras said. Well, like I said previously, you gotta trust the process. Even Brett Contreras says on this, the 10 rules of progressive overload article that he wrote. Progressive overload sometimes has a mind of its own. Quite often you'll do everything right, but you won't get stronger. The plan just won't work. And why is this, you might ask? Well, physiology is tricky and multifactorial. Basically, what happens while you are working out or from day to day is a tricky matter. And there are many factors which you would need to take into consideration if you were going to keep track on this. And even if you devoted all your life and your time and your livelihood to really keeping track of these factors, I don't think it would be possible, if I'm being totally honest. So, if you cannot keep track of this, and you know this is a really complex topic, what can you do? I mean, this is super complicated, isn't it? Well, yes, it is, but overcomplicating subjects is detrimental, just as it is detrimental to oversimplify concepts. Just keep in mind the basic, and that it is normal to hit plateaus over the long run. If you keep doing the basics right, you will be inevitably better off. Really, just trust the process. If you can take away anything about this video, I would leave you with only 2 concepts. First, progressive overload isn't linear, okay? That is something that I've been hammering home about. So don't despair when hitting a plateau, and don't program to continue upping the weight forever. Unfortunately, that won't work as much as I would enjoy bench pressing 1,000 pounds. Think on and the second point would be to think on the various ways that you can progressively overload your muscles without adding the weight. If you are a beginner, this will be useful to you in the future. If you are intermediate, it will be useful to you in the near future. And if you are advanced, it will be beneficial to you right now. I leave you guys with this then. Also, before you guys leave, check the same subject on the Shredded Sports Science channel. He has done a fucking fantastic video elaborating on this anabolic metabolism. Not anabolic metabolism, elaborating on this progressive overload, also on the anabolic metabolism. And it was the one to inspire me to do both these videos actually, so go give him some love. That's it, guys. Peace.